Why is there something instead of nothing? This may be the oldest and most profound philosophical question humanity has ever asked. Some people say God. Others answer with science. Most people simply admit, we don't know. But perhaps we've been asking the wrong question. Today, I'd like to explore a thought experiment. Not one intended to disprove God, but one that asks whether the traditional cosmological argument actually finishes its own reasoning. Thomas Aquinas argued that everything we observe has a cause. A tree grows from a seed. A mountain forms through geology. A watch has a watchmaker. If every event has a cause, then tracing causes backward eventually leads to what he called an uncaused cause. Something that simply exists. Something that itself requires no explanation. Something from which the complexities that we know today could have emerged. This is what is known as the cosmological argument. For our discussion, we grant that Aquinas was correct up to this point. But Aquinas went one step further. He identified this first cause as God. I'd like to stop exactly here, because something interesting has happened. Notice that Aquinas has successfully argued for an uncaused cause, but he has not yet argued for a personal deity. Not for Yahweh, not for Allah or Thor or Shiva or Zeus, not even for intelligence. Those are additional assertions outside of the argument. So let's forget religion for a moment. Suppose we know only one thing. There must be an uncaused cause. We can consider this uncaused cause to be some default state of existence. What could that possibly be? Aquinas argued that the uncaused cause must have 5 characteristics. Simplicity. It has no constituent parts. Perfection. It lacks nothing. Infinite, in terms of creative capacity. Immutable. It is incapable of changing its nature. Unified in that it exists is necessarily true. That is to say, the subject and the predicate are one and the same. In the religious context, this is like a deity proclaiming, I am that I am. But note that nothing in Aquinas' argument suggests intelligence, sentience, or intentionality. So let's consider the implications of that. Imagine arranging every possible answer on a very simple scale. We'll illustrate with the simple number scale. At one end, 0. Absolute nothingness. No matter. No energy, no fields, no space, no time. Nothing whatsoever. Next in the scale comes the smallest possible something. The simplest conceivable state of existence. And finally, everything more complicated than that. These 3 broad categories are enough for our thought experiment. Let's look at each one. Could absolute nothingness be the default state? At first glance, perhaps. But there's an immediate problem. If absolute nothingness were truly the default, there would never be anything else. Not eventually. Not somewhere else. Not after billions of years. Because there would be no time, no place, no mechanism, nothing. Nothingness has no ability to produce something. It has no properties from which anything could emerge. So, option 0 seems to eliminate itself. Scientists and theologians tend to agree on this point. Let's jump to the opposite extreme. Suppose the default state were already something rich and complicated. Immediately, another question appears. Where did that complexity come from? This isn't merely a scientific question. It's the very question Aquinas began with. Complex things call for explanation. The more structure something possesses, the more we naturally ask why it possesses that structure. And here's the interesting part. This applies just as much to God as it does to galaxies. An all-knowing, all-powerful personal being would not be a simple explanation. It would be the most elaborate thing anyone has ever proposed. If complexity requires explanation, then complexity cannot be where explanation ends. Otherwise, the cosmological argument stops following its own rules. That leaves one remaining possibility. The default state isn't nothing, nor is it something immensely complicated. Instead, it is the simplest possible thing that can exist. Not simple because simplicity is beautiful. Simple because anything more complicated would require further explanation. Simple because anything less would be nothing at all. Perhaps existence bottoms out. Not in a mind, but in a minimal fabric of reality. A foundation that exists because non-existence is not logically available. Physics doesn't currently tell us what this ultimate foundation might be. Perhaps quantum fields. Perhaps something even deeper. Perhaps something we haven't imagined. Physics does suggest that particles, or what we perceive as particles, emerge spontaneously from quantum fluctuations in empty space. The particles are seen to emerge from an unseen fabric. It is not difficult to imagine this same process of emerging also being the source of an emergent universe arising from the default state. It is not difficult to imagine the eventual heat death of the universe, as energy and matter dissipating back to the default state. It is not difficult to imagine this as a never-ending cycle. Let's review Aquinas' 5 characteristics of the uncaused cause and see how the 3 options meet his tests. Simplicity. It has no constituent parts. Perfection. It lacks nothing. Infinite. In creative or emergent capacity. Immutable. Incapable of changing its nature. Unified. The subject and predicate are indistinguishable. Referring to our thought experiment number scale, we can see that the 0 position, labeled nothing, fails the Aquinas test, mainly in that it has no creative or emergent capacity. We can also see that the greater than 1 position, labeled complexity, fails. It can address most issues, of course, although only via faith-based assertions. However, it fails the simplicity test, since an all-powerful and all-knowing entity cannot be simple. Only the 1 position, labeled simplest, passes each Aquinas test. Notably interesting is that it passes the unified test because, in this state of existence, matter, the noun, and energy, the verb, are unified. They are one and the same. This thought experiment isn't trying to answer physics. It's trying to identify what kind of answer physics should eventually discover. Whatever the final foundation turns out to be, the simplest possible explanation seems philosophically preferable to the most complicated imaginable one. Notice what this argument does not claim. It does not prove God doesn't exist. A powerful intelligence might exist. Perhaps many do. Perhaps our universe was deliberately created. None of that has been ruled out. But if such beings exist, they themselves would still require explanation. They could not be the ultimate default state. The cosmological argument may still point toward an uncaused cause. It just doesn't seem to point all the way to theology. Perhaps Thomas Aquinas got almost everything right. Perhaps there really is an uncaused cause. But his final step, identifying that cause with a personal deity, wasn't justified by the argument and requires a leap outside of the argument. That leap is called faith. Faith, in turn, requires no argument and responds to no counter-argument. The oldest question in philosophy may never receive a final answer. But sometimes, asking a better question is progress enough.